The airport was already awake when Zarina Cole arrived, though the sun hadn't yet broken the edge of the horizon. She moved with quiet purpose through Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson, not with the urgency of a harried traveler, but with the steady grace of someone who had long ago made peace with waiting. Dressed in a plain gray cardigan, dark jeans, and low-heeled shoes, Zarina didn't draw attention. She didn't want to. Her face was calm, thoughtful, eyes the color of seasoned mahogany, set deep with decades of quiet endurance. At 54, she had learned how to blend in when she wanted to. And today, she wanted to. She stepped into North Run Cafe near Gate B17, ordered a single black coffee, and found a seat by the window. Pulling out her tablet, she scrolled through the draft of a speech she'd written the night before. It wasn't a corporate pitch. It was a promise. A proposal that would fund aviation scholarships for underprivileged youth, mostly kids of color, many of whom had never been on a plane, let alone dreamed of flying one. Her program, Wings for the Community, had been her life's work. And this deal with Straightair? It was the key to scaling it nationally. An overhead voice broke the morning rhythm. Flight 622 to New York. Now boarding has been delayed approximately 30 minutes. Please remain near your gate. Around her, groans filled the air like rising steam. Some passengers sighed. Others glanced at their watches or phones. Zarina simply nodded to herself and continued reviewing her notes. A delay was nothing new. Life had taught her patience, especially when the world didn't move with you. She arrived at Gate B17 as boarding resumed. Her seat, 17C, economy class aisle. Zarina had turned down a complimentary upgrade. Too far from the people she was advocating for, she thought. She wanted to see, feel, and experience what they did. She tucked her tablet into the seat pocket and settled in. To her left, a chatty couple, mid-60s, white, on their way to visit grandchildren in New Jersey. Friendly enough. Across the aisle, a tired-looking mother rocked a baby in her arms. Then came the first brush of friction. Trevor Haynes, lead flight attendant, moved down the aisle with the kind of crisp, practiced efficiency that sometimes covered up indifference. He smiled at a sharply dressed man in 16A, winked at an older woman in pearls in 14D. But when he reached Zarina's row, the smile thinned out. "Anything?" he asked, not looking directly at her. "Could I get an extra napkin, please?" Zarina asked politely. A beat of silence. "We'll see what we have," he replied flatly, turning away before she could answer. It wasn't the words. It was the way they landed. Dismissive, like a door half shut in your face. Zarina didn't flinch, but the couple beside her exchanged a brief glance. When breakfast service began, she was halfway through a chapter in her book. The tray cart rolled up beside her. Trevor reached over, leaned too far, and before she could react, a tray of egg sausage and piping hot coffee tipped sideways, spilling directly onto Zarina's lap. The heat burned, but what hurt more was what came next. "Next time," Trevor snapped without looking at her. "Maybe don't move so suddenly. We're not a diner." Zarina froze. The cabin, for a second, seemed to stop breathing. Someone coughed. The couple next to her shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. 2 rows back, a young man with dark hair and a weathered hoodie, Liam Denrow, pulled out his phone. Subtly, quietly, he hit record. Zarina reached for the napkin that had never come. Her hands were steady, but her jaw clenched. She dabbed at her skirt, now ruined with coffee stains and the faint smell of eggs. Then she looked up at Trevor, who was already moving on to the next row. "It's okay," she said softly, half to herself. "Happens to the best of us." Her voice was calm, not bitter, not sarcastic. But behind it, something old stirred, something carved out of years of knowing when not to speak. Liam's eyes narrowed. He leaned back, silent, watching. Zarina sat quietly in seat 17C, hands folded in her lap, her clothes still damp from the breakfast spill. The faint scent of sausage lingered in the fabric, a stubborn reminder of what had happened. She looked out the window, but her mind was far from the clouds. The hum of a plane, the quiet clicks of seatbelt buckles, the occasional overhead announcement. They all faded into the background as her thoughts wandered back to Detroit. She had been 10 when her teacher told her, flat out, "College probably isn't for everyone, sweetie. You're a strong worker, though. You do great in retail." Zarina remembered the silence that followed, not just in the classroom, but in her heart. That silence had lasted years, not because she agreed, but because no one ever taught her how to fight back without becoming a fighter, and because no one else had spoken up either. Years later, when she finally got into business school, she wrote a note to herself in the back of her notebook. "One day, I'll build a world where girls like me don't have to prove they belong." That promise had never left her. Now, here she was, on a plane, headed to sign a contract that could bring that promise to life on a national scale. And she couldn't even get a napkin. She reached for the call button and pressed it, just once. Trevor walked by the first time without stopping. The second time, she tried again. He stopped in the aisle, arms crossed. "Yes." Her voice stayed even. "Would it be possible to get some water, please?" He glanced at the other passengers, then rolled his eyes. "We're in the middle of meal service, ma'am. You'll have to wait." 2 rows up, a white man in a Patagonia vest asked for a blanket. Trevor smiled and fetched one without hesitation. Zarina didn't say anything. She'd learned not to. But inside, a quiet ache formed, not just from the moment, but from how familiar it all felt. This wasn't new. This was just the same story, told again with different curtains. She returned her gaze to the window, let her breathing steady. The engine noise filled the silence. In row 19, Liam Denrow was watching. Liam had planned this trip as a mix of work and escape. A freelance journalist, mid-30s, stuck somewhere between stories and second chances. He'd taken the flight, hoping to clear his head and maybe stumble across something meaningful. He hadn't expected that something to be sitting 2 rows ahead, calmly wiping breakfast off her lap, while being ignored like wallpaper. He saw the way Trevor looked past her, heard the tone, felt the chill. Liam had written about injustice before, but mostly through second-hand accounts, quotes, stats, stories people gave him. This was different. This was right in front of him. He pulled out his phone again. Not to record this time. Just to open his notes app. He typed 3 words. "Who is she?" The flight landed with the usual thud and lurch. Passengers stirred. Seat belts unbuckled. Bags yanked from overhead bins. Zarina stood carefully, her skirt still stained, her dignity intact. She didn't rush. Liam kept an eye on her as they exited, a quiet current of curiosity pulling him forward. Then came the twist. Just past the gate, a sharply dressed man in a dark suit held a small sign, Ms. Zarina Cole. The Straightest Air logo gleamed in the corner. Behind him, a black limousine waited with the engine running. Liam blinked. Trevor, still standing near the galley, saw it too, and his jaw visibly clenched. Zarina didn't acknowledge either of them. She simply nodded to the driver, stepped into the back seat, and disappeared behind tinted windows. Liam stood frozen for a second. Wait, what? He opened his phone again, typed a new line beneath the first. She's not just a passenger. The carousel area was quiet when Liam caught up to her again. She stood alone, hands folded, waiting for her bag like everyone else. She looked peaceful, like someone who'd seen storms before and learned how to carry an umbrella without anyone noticing. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Excuse me," he said. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but what happened back there wasn't right. And I think people should know." She looked at him for a long moment, not smiling, not frowning, just seeing. "People knowing doesn't always change things," she said softly. "But sometimes it starts something." He nodded, unsure what to say next. But the silence between them felt less awkward than it should have. Like maybe it was okay not to fill it. "Liam," he said, offering his hand. She shook it. "Zarina." He smiled. "I figured." Trevor leaned against the counter in the crew lounge, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee like it owed him something. He smirked as he recounted the morning to a fellow flight attendant, Marcy, who was half listening while scrolling through her phone. "She looked at me like I owed her a 5-star dinner or something," he said with a laugh. "You know, the type, probably never flown before and thinks a napkin means first-class service." Marcy raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. Trevor didn't notice. He was too caught up in his version of events, too confident in the idea that nobody would challenge him, least of all the woman in 17C. Anyway, he added, with a shrug, she'll forget about it by the time she hits baggage claim. That type always does. But Marcy was already checking her email. Her eyes flicked across the screen, stopping at a message flagged urgent. Incident report, Flight 622. Her stomach dropped a little. Hey, Trev. She started hesitantly. Did you know someone filed a formal complaint? It's being reviewed. They mentioned a spill incident, and your response. Trevor's smirk faded like bad lighting. He stood up straighter, brow furrowing. What? From who? It doesn't say, Marcy replied. Just says it was from a passenger. And there might be video. They're escalating it to corporate. Now he looked nervous. His posture stiffened, and for the first time all day, he stopped talking. Across town, in a quiet suite on the 15th floor of a Halden Inn, Zarina stood by the window, arms crossed, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. The city was alive with movement, but her mind felt still, stuck between two impossible choices. The folder on the table contained the final contract. The straightest air deal. Months of planning, negotiation, background checks, and legal reviews, all compressed into 57 pages and a signature line. It was ready. So was she. Or, at least, she had been. Now, she wasn't so sure. The hotel room had a certain stillness to it. The kind that makes your thoughts echo too loudly. Zarina paced a little, her fingers brushing the corner of the contract but not touching it. Her phone buzzed. It was Maria, her longtime assistant. You made it okay? Maria asked. Yeah, Zarina replied. Everything's set for the meeting. Maria hesitated. You sound unsettled. Zarina sighed. I am. Something happened on the flight. She explained. Not all the details, but enough. Maria went quiet for a few seconds. I hear you, she said carefully. But you also know what's at stake. If we don't sign this, 422 students won't get their first-year scholarships. That's this fall. We'll have to freeze expansion until at least next year. Zarina closed her eyes. I know. You always said this program wasn't about companies. It was about the kids. I still believe that, Zarina said, her voice low. But if we partner with a company that lets this kind of culture go unchecked, what does that teach them? Maria didn't answer. She didn't need to. Zarina hung up and walked back to the table. The folder still sat there, silently judging. Later that evening, she checked her email. One new message. No subject line. From Liam Denrow. She clicked. I know who you are now. I didn't at first. But I saw what happened. And I recorded it. I'm not sure what to do with this. I've seen a lot of people look the other way. I've done it myself, more than I care to admit. I guess I'm just asking. Should I do the same this time? Zarina sat with the message for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she didn't reply right away. It wasn't a simple question, and there wasn't a simple answer. The truth was, she didn't want to be the center of attention. She never had. She wanted her work to speak louder than her wounds. But maybe, just maybe, this time the wound was the work. She typed slowly, carefully. Do what you believe is right. But know this. Silence has never protected people like me. And it won't protect you either. Then she hit send. The coffee shop in the lobby of the Halden Inn was nearly empty, save for a few travelers hunched over laptops and a barista humming behind the counter. The morning air was thick with roasted beans and quiet urgency. Zarina sat near the back, hands wrapped around a cup that had long since gone cold. She didn't need the caffeine. She needed clarity. She was waiting, not because she had to, but because she'd said yes to a meeting she didn't quite understand yet. Liam walked in, still wearing the same scuffed boots from a flight, his jacket wrinkled from travel. He spotted her, hesitated for just a second, then approached with the kind of respect that didn't need to be announced. Thanks for meeting me, he said. Zarina nodded, motioned for him to sit. You didn't have to come. I think I did. They sat in a pause that felt heavier than it should have. Then Liam spoke first. I've written about stuff like this before. Race, power, systemic bias. But it's always been someone else's story. This time I saw it. I felt it. And I froze. Zarina studied him, not judging. Just listening. "Do you know what bothers me?" she asked softly. "It's not that he spilled the food. Accidents happen. It's how quick he was to assume it was my fault, and how easily everyone else just accepted that." Liam looked down. "You want to write about it?" she asked. "I do," he said. "But not because it'll go viral. I think people need to see who you are, what you're trying to do. I didn't know any of that when I hit record. But now." Zarina leaned back, quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When I started Montreve Capital, nobody would take me seriously. A black woman, not from the right schools, not married to the right man, not sitting in the right zip code. I built it because I was tired of waiting for permission." She looked out the window. "But even now, with all this, I still have to ask myself, do I push back and risk everything I built, or do I sign and hope it gets better?" Liam let her words settle. Then he said carefully, "Maybe this isn't just about you anymore. Maybe this is the moment someone like you makes it impossible for them not to change." It wasn't challenge. It was a truth. And she felt it. Back upstairs, the folder still sat on the table, same place she'd left it. Only now, the weight of it felt different. There it was, the contract, clean and ready, signature line marked in blue. The airline had couriered it that morning. All she had to do was sign. She flipped through it again. Page after page of promises and projections. But not a single word about employee conduct, training on unconscious bias, or service reform. Not a sentence about protecting passengers from being belittled while trying to reach their destination with dignity. It was a perfect business deal. And it was hollow. Zarina stood up and crossed to the window again. The city below moved as it always did. People rushing to jobs, errands, interviews. Some were probably flying today, maybe even on straightest air. Maybe someone just like her would take seat 17C and think this time might be different. She picked up her phone and opened a new message to the executive team. Subject, tomorrow's meeting. I'll be there. But I'm bringing a condition. No greeting. No fluff. Just the truth. She hit send. Later that night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark. No television, no background noise. Just her thoughts. She didn't regret holding back her signature. What weighed on her now wasn't fear, it was resolve. A quiet one, but no less powerful. She didn't want justice for what happened to her. She wanted to make sure that what happened to her couldn't happen again, not to a student in her program, not to someone's grandmother, not to anyone who didn't fit someone else's mold of who deserved to be treated with respect. In that moment, she felt the shift. She wasn't standing up for herself anymore. She was standing in front of something much bigger. The 15th floor of the Halden Inn was hushed, all polished wood and muted carpet, the kind of place where power never had to raise its voice. Zarina stepped off the elevator with her back straight, her heels clicking softly down the hallway as a straightest air representative led her to the boardroom. Inside, the air smelled faintly of citrus and new leather. There was a pitcher of water on the table, a plate of untouched croissants, and a row of executives dressed in tailored suits that all looked vaguely alike. Marla Kenwick, the president of Straightest Air, stood up to greet her with a bright, rehearsed smile. "Zarina, we're honored you're here. This is a big day for us." Zarina shook her hand. "Let's hope it's a big day for more than just the company." She took a seat near the center of the table. Around her, a few faces stirred recognition, not because she knew them, but because she remembered them. Some of them had been on the flight, in first class. They had watched, and done nothing. She sat silently as the presentation began. PowerPoint slides flipped past, each one filled with graphs, projections, and phrases like social impact, inclusive growth, and community alignment. Marla spoke with confidence, her voice practiced. "We see this partnership as more than financial. This is about legacy, about creating real change. That's why we're thrilled to have Montreve Capital leading the way." Zarina smiled politely, but said nothing. Her mind wasn't on the slides. It was on that moment at 30,000 feet. The look in Trevor's eyes. The silence of the other passengers. The way a hot breakfast could become a message. When Marla wrapped up, She turned toward Zarina. Before we sign, we'd love to hear a few words. Zarina nodded slowly. Thank you. I'd like to speak, but I'd prefer to go last. Marla hesitated, then agreed. The others went around the room. Chief of Operations, Head of Marketing. A community liaison who seemed like he had just graduated last week. Everyone said the right things. Everyone sounded supportive. When it was finally her turn, the room quieted. Zarina leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Her voice was calm but steady. I want to share something before I sign this contract. Not as an investor, not even as a businesswoman, just as a passenger. The room shifted. Attention narrowed. A few eyes darted toward one another. I flew straight air 2 days ago. Coach, seat 17C. She paused. I chose to fly economy because that's how most of the kids in our program will fly when they get the chance. She let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. I was treated like I didn't belong. I was ignored. When food was spilled on me, I was blamed. Not once did the person responsible offer an apology. He looked at me like I was a problem. The room was still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. I'm not telling you this to ask for anything. I'm telling you because that experience was not rare. It was just honest. It told the truth about how easy it is to look through someone when they don't look like your idea of who matters. She reached into her bag, pulled out the folder with the signed pages. Everything in here looks perfect, but it says nothing about how people are treated on your planes. It says nothing about accountability or training or inclusion beyond a PR slide. She set the folder down in front of her. The contract was still unsigned. I believe in this partnership. I believe it could do good. But if this company can't look at itself honestly, if it can't see the seat I sat in, then we're not building anything worth signing. Marla's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Zarina sat back. I'm not walking away, but I'm not signing today. Not without real commitments, not talk, not promises. Structure, policy, change. The room stayed frozen, unsure of what to say, what to do. The boardroom felt colder now. The citrus scent had faded, replaced by the metallic edge of silence, the kind that creeps into a room after someone has said what no one else had the courage to. No one touched the croissants. No one sipped the water. The energy had shifted. Zarina remained seated for a moment, letting the weight of her previous words settle over the room like morning fog. Then she stood again. Her movement was slow, deliberate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I'd like to propose 2 additions to the agreement, she began, her voice clear and steady, as if she were reciting a fact instead of issuing a challenge. First, mandatory training for all frontline staff, focused on unbiased service, respect for every human being, and cultural competence that goes beyond a checklist. Second, the creation of a scholarship fund, sourced directly from annual company profits, to provide education and training for underrepresented youth pursuing careers in aviation. She paused, not for dramatic effect, but to give them time to sit with it. Really sit with it. Across the long table, a rustle of discomfort moved like wind through wheat. One executive adjusted his tie. Another clicked his pen, then stopped abruptly, realizing how loud it sounded in the silence. A man near the end of the table finally spoke. Gray suit, thin voice, thick resume. With all due respect, Ms. Cole, he said, trying to sound firm but measured. This is a business contract, not a moral manifesto. We can't restructure an entire operation around one unfortunate incident. Zarina didn't blink. This isn't about one incident, she replied. It's about how many like it have gone unspoken. It's about what your customers don't say out loud, because they've been taught it won't matter. Her eyes locked on his. You've asked me to sign my name next to yours. I need you to understand what my name stands for. Another voice chimed in, this one from legal. A younger man, sharp suit, sharp tone. Emotions don't belong in a legal framework, he said, shifting slightly in his chair. That's the issue here. It sets a precedent we can't quantify. Zarina turned to him, her gaze calm but piercing. You're right, she said. People are emotional. They're also your customers. Your employees. The reason your planes stay in the air. If your contracts can't make space for their dignity, then maybe your framework needs adjusting. The room stilled again. Marla Kenwick, seated at the head of the table, had said nothing so far. Her fingers were laced under her chin, her expression unreadable. The brightness from earlier was gone. What remained was something quieter and more real. She was watching not just Zarina, but the room, her team, the shifting posture, the unease, the awareness. And then the door opened. Every head turned. Liam stood in the doorway, slightly breathless, holding a newspaper folded in half. His shirt was wrinkled, hair a little out of place, but his expression was clear and focused. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, stepping inside. "But I think this changes the conversation." He walked toward Marla and handed her the paper. Zarina already knew what it was. Marla unfolded it. The headline stared back in bold print. "The woman who sat in silence and made an airline listen." Below it, a photograph captured the moment. Zarina stepping out of a black car, head high, skirt stained, expression calm but unshakable. Around her, a blur of people, some staring, some unaware they were looking at a woman about to change the trajectory of their brand. Marla scanned the article. Her jaw tightened slightly. Her eyes moved fast across the print. When she finally looked up, she didn't look at Liam or Zarina. She looked at her team. Zarina folded her arms. She didn't need to speak again, but she did, just once more. "Public perception matters to all of you. Let's not pretend otherwise." But this isn't about headlines. It's about who you are when no one's writing about you, who you choose to be when it's not trending. A long silence followed. Then Marla exhaled. A slow, steady release. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice lower but clearer than before. "The employee involved in the incident will be suspended pending an internal review. We'll begin an investigation today." Zarina nodded once. "I'm not here to ruin a man's career." Marla met her eyes. "Then what are you here for?" "Accountability," Zarina replied. "Not just for him. For the system that trained him to believe how he treated me was acceptable." Across the table, a woman from HR leaned in. Her voice was soft, but direct. "If we agree to these additions, we'll need time. We'll need to draft new language and reroute it through legal." Zarina returned to her chair. "Then take the time," she said. "I'm not interested in a rushed signature. I'm interested in real change." The quiet returned, but this time it wasn't avoidance. It was reckoning. Marla stood. "We'll revise the agreement with your terms included, and we'll prepare a statement acknowledging the incident and our intention to evolve. We'll reconvene next week." Zarina stood too. She reached across the table, not stiffly, not symbolically, and shook Marla's hand. It wasn't a victory. It was a beginning. The lobby of the Halden Inn looked different on the way out. The polished marble still gleamed. The sunlight still spilled through tall windows, and the air still held that faint scent of lavender and something manufactured to suggest luxury. But for Zarina, it all felt quieter now. Not in volume, just in weight. The boardroom upstairs was behind her. So were the voices, the calculations, the careful eye contact. What remained was something unresolved, humming beneath the surface like a current she couldn't ignore. As she crossed the lobby toward the exit, movement caught her eye. Trevor Haynes sat near the elevators, hunched slightly forward, elbows on his knees like someone waiting for news they weren't sure they wanted to hear. His uniform was gone. In its place, a wrinkled dress shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest he'd been sitting there a while, and a clipboard resting on his lap, like a prop he didn't know how to hold anymore. Their eyes met. Trevor stood, not with confidence, but with a kind of shaky instinct, like a man who wasn't sure if he was supposed to stand at all. "Ms. Cole," he said, voice low and unsure. "I didn't know who you were." Zarina didn't stop walking right away. But when she did, it was with purpose. Her posture didn't shift, and her gaze didn't harden. She simply turned toward him, calm and grounded. "That's the problem," she replied softly. "You didn't know. So you assumed I didn't matter." The words didn't hit him like a slap. They landed slower, like a truth he'd been trying to keep out, now slipping past the last line of defense. Trevor looked down, one hand tightening around the edge of the clipboard. I was just doing my job. Zarina tilted her head slightly, eyes never leaving him. No, she said gently. You were doing what you thought your job allowed you to do. There's a difference. He didn't answer. The silence that stretched between them wasn't hostile. It was raw, honest, like they were standing in the space between who someone had been and who they might still become. Zarina didn't rattle off or resume. She didn't talk about Monterey Capital or the value of her name or how the pen she refused to use had just paused a multi-million-dollar deal. None of that would have mattered anyway. Not in this moment. What mattered was the shift. I'm not here to humiliate you, she said. I'm not even angry anymore. But I want you to understand something. Trevor looked up again. I'm not asking you to carry shame. Shame doesn't transform people. But awareness? That's a start. He swallowed. Just once. But she could see it. The way the words moved through him, like a mirror held too close to avoid. Zarina stepped closer, not aggressive, not towering, just present. I hope next time you see someone like me, she continued, her voice quiet but firm. Someone without a title. Someone not dressed like a CEO. You'll choose to respect them. Even when there's no audience. Even when no one's recording. Trevor's eyes didn't dart away this time. He nodded. Not out of agreement, but recognition. And that was enough. Zarina turned and walked away. Not triumphant. Not cold. Just clear. Outside, the pulse of Atlanta wrapped around her. Traffic moved with its usual chaos. The sidewalks buzzed with lives unfolding in every direction. Baristas yelling orders. Kids trailing behind parents. A man singing off-key near the corner. The world, as always, didn't stop. It never had. Her car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door without a word. Zarina slid into the back seat, letting the door click softly shut behind her. Radio on, the driver asked. She shook her head. No, thank you. The city moved past the window. Brick buildings, traffic lights, blinking amber. A boy riding a bike too big for him. Then her phone buzzed. Marla. Zarina stared at the screen for a second, then answered. Zarina. Marla's voice came through, more grounded than before. The board reviewed everything. They've agreed. The training will be implemented. The scholarship fund is in. And she hesitated, not for effect, but like she was choosing her words carefully. We'd like to ask if you'd serve as an advisor to help guide our leadership program. Permanently. Not as a figurehead. As a partner. Zarina turned to look out the window, taking in the skyline she knew so well. She exhaled slowly, more breath than sound. I'll think about it, she said. We'll wait, Marla replied. Then paused. Thank you. The call ended. And yet, something lingered, quiet, steady, and undeniable. Zarina leaned her head back. Not in exhaustion. In clarity. She didn't feel like she'd won something. That wasn't the point. What she felt was balance. Like she'd carried the weight long enough. And now, finally, others were starting to pick it up too. For most of her life, she had been told she needed to speak louder to be heard. But this time, it was her stillness that had done the talking. And when the world stopped to listen, that was the real shift. The view from Zarina's office in downtown Detroit wasn't flashy. It overlooked an old church on one side and a half-renovated building on the other. But for her, it was perfect. It reminded her that change rarely looked shiny at the start. It just had to begin somewhere. She stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes tracing the traffic below, as if it might help her slow down the whirlwind of the past 2 days. 48 hours. That was all it had taken. One seat in coach. One moment of disregard. One article that hit a nerve across the country. And one unsigned contract that forced a corporation to stop, listen, and pivot. Zarina wasn't one to get emotional after the fact. She trained herself to move forward, not dwell. But today, standing in that little office built from persistence and thick skin, she allowed herself one long breath. Not relief, exactly. Not victory either. It felt more like exhale after years of holding something in. Her phone buzzed. She let it ring. On the muted TV in the corner, a local station was airing a segment. The camera cut to footage of Trevor Haynes walking out of Stratus Air headquarters, alone, no fanfare. He wasn't flanked by lawyers or PR handlers. Just a man in a too-big coat, holding a folded letter in one hand. In the clip, a reporter approached him, asking if he had any final words. Trevor paused before answering. "I never thought I treated people differently," he said. "But the truth is, I didn't care enough to notice I was doing it." He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He just walked away. Zarina didn't feel satisfaction watching it. She didn't want that. But she respected the honesty. He wasn't fired. He had stepped down on his own. Maybe for the first time, he understood that silence isn't neutral. It's part of the problem. Later that afternoon, Stratus Air released a statement. It announced their official partnership with Wings for the Community. They committed to a full overhaul of their frontline training programs, centered around bias awareness, equitable service, and inclusion. And in a paragraph that felt quietly monumental, they named Zarina Cole as Senior Cultural Advisor. Not honorary, not symbolic. A real seat at the table. She turned off the TV and sat at her desk, hands resting on her knees. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something had shifted. Just enough. Weeks passed. Then came the ceremony. The new Aviation Training Center opened its doors in Atlanta, packed with first-generation students and proud families. The lobby buzzed with excitement, but when the sign was unveiled, a hush fell over the crowd. Cole Academy of Flight Equity. The name shimmered in gold above the entrance. Zarina stood near the back, quietly observing. She didn't need the spotlight. She just wanted to see it real. A speaker stepped up to the mic. It was a teenage girl, no more than 14, wearing the school's navy blue blazer. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded her note cards. "My name is Maya Haynes," she began. "I'm here because I believe everyone deserves a chance to fly, no matter what they look like, no matter where they come from." A few heads turned at the last name. "I'm here," she continued, voice growing steadier, "because a woman didn't stay silent when she had every reason to. And because of her, I see a future I didn't know I was allowed to imagine." Zarina blinked. She hadn't known. She hadn't asked. But here was this girl, Trevor's daughter, standing on a stage, stepping into a world her father once helped to close off. And now, maybe was helping to open. After the applause, someone turned to Zarina and whispered, "That's gotta feel good, right?" Zarina smiled, but it wasn't smug. It was full, quiet, grounded. "It feels like hope," she said. And that was enough. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about ego. It was about creating space where dignity didn't have to be earned through pain. Where a seat on a plane didn't define your worth. Where silence was no longer the cost of being seen. Sometimes, the most powerful change doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing still and refusing to be unseen. Zarina didn't raise her voice. She didn't seek revenge. She simply made it impossible for the system to ignore what it had tried to overlook. So here's the question. In your world, whose silence needs to be heard, and what will you do when it finally speaks? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. There's more to come.